Welcome to your deep dive. You sent us a bunch of articles all about Elvis Presley and his quotes.
Yeah, a lot of quotes.
So we're going to dive deep into those.
That's right.
But we're not just going to rattle them off.
Right.
We're going to use these quotes to kind of try and figure out who Elvis was as a person.
Yeah, I think that's the fun part.
Yeah, and what he valued and maybe even what he was anxious about.
Right. Or what worried him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What can we glean from just his words?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We have so many of his words,
We do.
but putting together the man behind them is the real challenge.
It is.
It's almost like we have these puzzle pieces
Yeah.
of his personality kind of scattered around.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes the pieces we find are a little surprising.
Right.
Like this quote from an interview he did in 1972.
Okay.
He says, "I've never gotten over what they call stage fright. I go through it every show. Elvis Presley nervous."
You would think that the king of rock and roll would just own the stage.
Yeah.
Without a second thought. But you know what? It turns out that stage fright is way more common than people think,
Really?
even for legends.
Wow.
But the thing that's interesting about this quote is that Elvis didn't let it stop him.
Right.
He channeled that energy
Yeah.
into these amazing performances.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because some of his stage moves, the way that he commanded the audience's attention almost seems like he was taking control,
I agree.
using that nervous energy.
Yeah, definitely. And it shows a real dedication to what he was doing.
It does.
But it also shows this vulnerable side
Yeah.
that we don't always think about when we think about Elvis.
Right. It's a good reminder that everyone feels pressure to perform even when they feel uncertain.
Right. Yeah, I know I've definitely been there, sweating it out under the spotlight.
For sure.
And it kind of makes you think about Elvis. And despite all that pressure and the fame that he had, he still seemed to stay true to himself.
He did. And that's where some of these other quotes that we have really kind of throw a wrench in that classic Elvis image. Oh, really?
He said things like, "I'll never feel comfortable taking a strong drink, and I'll never feel easy smoking a cigarette. And I've tried to lead a straight, clean life, not set any kind of a bad example."
That does not sound like the king of rock and roll.
Not at all.
Really interesting.
It's like this young Elvis is trying to be a good role model,
Yeah.
but he's also trying to figure out how to deal with this rock and roll world.
It's like he was walking a tightrope
Totally.
with all of that pressure on him to maintain that image.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Okay.
He says, "It's not how much you have that makes people look up to you. It's who you are."
That's pretty deep.
It is. It really makes you think,
Yeah.
especially for a guy who is surrounded by wealth and fame.
Yeah.
It seems like he had a real awareness of himself and his values.
It does. And there are other quotes that point to that humility, too. Like he said once, "I don't want to be just a memory."
Right.
What kind of legacy did he want to leave behind?
I don't know.
It's a good question.
It is.
His music is certainly a big part of that legacy. And speaking of his music, there's this quote that kind of threw me for a loop.
Oh, yeah?
He said, "I don't know anything about music. In my line, you don't have to." How do we square that with the fact that he revolutionized music?
It is a bit of a head scratcher.
It is.
I mean, on the one hand, he wasn't a classically trained musician.
Right,
He didn't write a lot of his hits.
right.
But he was an amazing interpreter of songs.
Yeah,
He was able to pour so much emotion into every note
he was.
that it just resonated with people.
Yeah, and maybe that's kind of what he meant by that.
Yeah.
He wasn't an expert,
Right.
but he had this gut feeling for what worked.
Yeah, and he wasn't afraid to blend genres
He wasn't.
and pull from gospel and blues and country
Yeah.
to make something totally new.
Yeah, think about the energy he brought to his performances.
Oh, yeah.
His voice, his movements, it was electric.
For sure. It's no wonder they called him the king.
No wonder. But even the king had his struggles.
He-
He even mentioned feeling like he'd lost his musical direction in Hollywood.
Oh,
He said, "My songs were the same conveyor-belt mass production, just like most of my movies were."
Yeah.
You can really feel the disillusionment.
Yeah, you can almost hear it in his voice.
Yeah, he was yearning for something authentic.
Right. And that kind of connects to another quote where he says, "I don't think I'm bad for people.
Yeah.
If I did think I was bad for people, I would go back to driving a truck."
It's like he was saying he would rather walk away from it all
Yeah,
than compromise his values.
definitely. There's a real sense of integrity there, staying
Yeah.
true to himself.
For sure. And speaking of values, there's this quote that really resonated with me.
Okay.
"Values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do."
Wow, that's such a powerful analogy. It
is.
really shows that your values are a part of you,
Yeah.
and they come out in everything you do.
So how did Elvis's values come through in his life?
Well, for one, there are tons of stories about his generosity.
Oh, really?
He was known for giving away cars and jewelry,
Wow.
even houses to people who needed them.
That's amazing.
There's even a story about him buying a Cadillac for a complete stranger,
What?
just because he liked the guy's hat.
It's like his generosity was a part of his music.
I think you're
He was
right.
spreading joy and connecting with people.
Absolutely. And there was also his spiritual side,
Oh, right.
which comes up a lot in his quotes.
Yeah.
He said, "Where could I go but to the Lord?"
So clearly his faith was important to him,
It was a source of comfort for him.
especially during tough times.
Definitely. It's like another layer to his persona.
It is.
This rock and roll swagger
Right.
mixed with spirituality.
He was a complex guy.
He was full of contradictions, but always trying to be true to himself.
Yeah, and those contradictions are kind of what make him so interesting. This global icon,
Right.
a symbol of rebellion.
And freedom.
But he also had this deep respect for tradition
Yeah.
and faith.
And family.
Yeah, it really does make you appreciate him in a whole new way. And, when you think about his journey, his rise to fame, you can't help but think about his ambition. He had that famous quote, "Ambition is a dream with a V8 engine." What do you think he meant by that?
It's such a classic Elvis line.
Mhm.
It's like it really captures his energy and the drive that he had. But I also think it's about not just having a dream, but having the power to make that dream a reality.
Right, like putting in the work.
Exactly. Having that V8 engine.
And Elvis definitely had that engine.
Oh, yeah. From truck driver to global superstar.
Practically overnight. It's inspiring, but it's also a little intimidating. Like,
Yeah.
how do we even tap into that kind of ambition?
Right. I think if Elvis were here, he'd probably tell us to find those things we're really passionate about,
Yeah.
the things that keep us up at night, and then figure out what our own personal V8 engine is.
Okay, I like that.
Like, what are our unique talents or skills or the resources that we have?
That we can use to achieve our dreams.
Exactly. So what about you? What really stood out to you about Elvis after spending all this time with his quotes?
I think, honestly, it was his self-awareness. Like, he knew he was an icon, but he never let it go to his head.
I agree with that.
Like, he was still just a person.
Yeah, and he had the same struggles as everyone else.
Anxieties, insecurities.
Yeah, but he always seemed to come back to his values,
Yeah.
sense of humor,
Right.
and that love for music.
It makes you see him less as, like, the king and more as just a regular person.
Totally.
Ah.
And I think that's the power of his words. They let us see those different sides of him.
Yeah, for sure. So if Elvis were here today and he was giving us advice based on everything we've learned, what do you think he'd say?
I think he would tell us to just be ourselves,
Yeah.
embrace our passions and go after them with everything we've got.
Okay.
And to remember that it's not about the fame or the money.
Yeah.
It's about who you are as a person.
That's really well said. Well, after this deep dive, I think I'm going to have to go listen to some Elvis.
Yeah, me too. Maybe even find some more of his quotes.
Yeah, you never know what gems are out there.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Elvis Presley.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.